Brew Strong is brought to you by morebeer.com, where a man can brew like a man.
It's time for the beer radio you've been looking for. This is the show that dispels myths, tackles the toughest topics, and makes no apologies for geeking out on beer. Hosted by two guys that drink before they think. Jamil and John Palmer. This is Brew Strong.
Hey, howdy, hey, my brewing brothers and sisters. We're back for another episode of Brew Strong, and I've got here in the studio with me my good friend John the Rock Palmer.
Good morning, Brew Strong.
And we're graced with the presence of Dr. Charles Bamforth, or as he prefers to be called, Charlie.
Thank you for inviting me.
One of the great
to have you here.
Preeminent brewing scientists in the world, I would say. Yes?
Well, if you say so.
Or at least in the studio. Well, and I want to get right to our topic for the day, but I did not want to miss out on mentioning our fine sponsor, More Beer. Get you over to morebeer.com and check out all their great products, great prices. They are great people with a lot of helpful information and great prices on great products. So
yeah, I was just there, in fact.
Yeah?
Yeah, I just swung by and grabbed a pump and a temperature controller.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Well, and they've got everything. They got from temperature controllers to pumps to odd-looking
personnel.
Yeah. Odd-looking personnel, yeah, odd-behaving personnel. Yeah, JP works down there, so I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that. Well, in today's show, as I said, we want to get right in it. I want to make as much use as possible of Dr. Bamforth's time. And Ryan, he had asked in the forum, does clear wort into the fermenter necessarily mean clear beer out? And we see a lot of questions like that. It's like, my beer isn't clear, why is it, what is it, and I think a lot of people aren't even familiar that what they're seeing is, a haze for one reason or another. So we've asked Charlie to come and speak with us about beer haze. So, Charlie, what exactly is beer haze, and why would a brewer be interested in that? Why is that important to us?
Well, beer haze basically refers to the clarity of the beer, whether it's bright or not, whether there are particles in it, and whether when you look at it, it's turbid. Mm-hmm. And of course, some beers should be turbid. One thinks straight away of a Hefeweizen and something like that. So, in which case, you've got to make sure that you've got exactly the right, consistent degree of turbidity, because I'm always preaching consistency, and a beer should be exactly the way you expect it to look and taste. And so if it's turbid, let's make sure it's always the same degree of turbidity. Most beers are not hazy or cloudy, and we like them to be what we call bright and sparkling or brilliant. And we want them to stay that way. We don't want it to the beer to develop haze or turbidity during time. So it really is a significant influence on people's perception of quality. I know a lot of people who, if they see a cloudy beer and they'll think, it's not supposed to be cloudy. What's growing in it? Mm-hmm. And it's almost certainly it's not a living organism that's causing the haze, but it's due to some insoluble material that's chemical but not living. So it's a major aspect of product quality that we need to consider. Of course, there are many different types of haze as well, as I'm sure you like to get onto.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And what about just briefly, Ryan's question, does clear wort into the fermenter necessarily mean clear beer out?
No, not necessarily. I mean, it'll help in that, if you've got particles coming through in the wort, then they may or may not survive the fermentations. They may stick onto the yeast. Equally, stuff may drop off the yeast, and the yeast itself, of course, is a potential source of turbidity. Mm-hmm. And of course, it also depends on what you do with the beer coming out of the fermenter. Temperature is absolutely key and critical as a determinant of the extent to which you'll have haze. So if you have, say, you have clear wort going into a fermenter, after the yeast has done its job, and then you take the green beer or the beer and you chill it to a temperature below that of the wort, then you're going to start getting a degree of turbidity that wasn't there in the clear wort. So
kind of chill haze, huh?
Chill haze, exactly. And so it really is not an absolute that clear wort is everything. There are a lot of people in the world, particularly in Germany, where they're absolutely passionate about having clear wort, but that's not necessarily for reasons of haze. It's as much to do with reasons of flavor as anything else.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, I guess haze, apart from being visual, does it also have can that affect the flavor of the beer down the road?
It's unlikely. It usually is a psychological thing, I for one, I'm the sort of person who, if I see a beer that comes out of a bottle or a can turbid when I don't expect it to, my initial reaction is to be suspicious. And if, of course, the turbidity was due to some growth of something, then sure, there may be a flavor effect. Mm-hmm. But it's primarily a psychological thing. You do, and this is people say this a lot. You drink with your eyes, and the foam, and the clarity, and the colour. They all will indirectly impact your perception of flavour.
Okay.
Well, and I did have an experience like that with what I believe was bacterial at a bottle of one of my favorite beers. I got a 6-pack, and they were, hazy to the point where they were nearly opaque. I couldn't see my hand on the other side of the glass, and the flavor was nothing like what I was anticipating from this product. It was radically different, and I was shocked. I went and got the same beer from another source, and no haze, brilliantly clear.
That's clearly contamination.
Right.
Yeah. A lot of different infections can throw haze, I suppose.
Well, they can. Basically any particle, whether it's grown up by multiplication of organisms or whether it's a piece of chemistry, they will scatter light. But you got to remember also that when we talk about beer haze, and sometimes I prefer the word clarity. It's not just the sort of uniform turbidity, dullness that you get evenly distributed through the beer. You can have different types of insolubility. You can have precipitates.
Sure.
And you can also have what we call bits. And bits is an interesting topic in its own right. And when I was quality manager with Bass many years ago now, we had a real bits problem in an alcohol-free beer that we sold in Saudi Arabia. And it serves us right, wasn't it, for actually trying to do that. But basically, there was an interaction taking place between a foam stabilizer that we were using and the clarifying agent, the isinglass fining agent. Oh. And in Saudi, it gets kind of hot, and it was this alcohol-free beer, which was called Barbican, was sitting on a dockside in Saudi. It was reaching 50, 55 degrees Celsius. I make no apologies for using Celsius, by the way.
That's fine.
I'm a missionary. I'm a missionary over here trying to correct the error of your ways. But and these things stick together, and they were throwing bits. Even worse, we actually changed the packaging. We went from cans to bottles, and these bits. First of all, they actually took the form of a sediment, a fluffy sediment in the bottom of the bottle. And when you looked to the bottom of the bottle, there was the precipitate was wobbling around in the bottom. It was really quite disgusting. And when it was poured into a glass, it broke up to give bits. And this was because of this interaction between two additions. Mm-hmm. Our solution was to take away the foam stabilizer, because being English brewers, temperamentally, we couldn't take away the isinglass findings. We had to keep those there. And nobody gave a rat's whatever about the foam. So we took away the foam stabilizer. But, that was one source of this particle, this bits. A real extreme example. Often, if you look in a beer, you do see floaters. You see fibers in there. And they're not usually to such an extent that they are a major problem. But sometimes it can be, and of course the famous example is Schlitz from many years ago, where they had a real problem with bits and fundamentally didn't solve it, and the company went under. It was one of the two biggest companies in the United States at the time, brewing companies, and it died. So, never underestimate the power of turbidity. So you can have these bits as well. And then there's another type of haze, which euphemistically is called invisible haze, which used to really irritate my boss in England. How can it be an invisible haze if you can't see it? So what it was a haze that you detected instrumentally. To measure haze, you put the beer in a haze meter. And the traditional way of doing it is to put your bottle or your glass into this meter, shine light at it, and see how much light is scattered at 90 degrees to the incident, and measure that. And the more light scattered, the more haze. But very, very small particles, which you really find it very hard, if at all possible, to see by your eye, they will scatter light to a disproportionate extent. And so if these very, very small particles are present in the beer, you get a huge haze reading, but the beer is bright. So people say, well, that's not a problem then. Well, it is a problem, because if you're in the middle of the night shift and somebody's measuring the haze, and you being the head brewer, I've just had an interesting outside quality control experience the night before, and are lying in bed. You don't want to have a telephone call to say, the beer's hazy, but it looks okay. We need a decision, And if the decision is, well, filter it again, it won't work, because these particles are so small you can't filter them out. So that's an extreme example of a problem. It's that can exist in a commercial operation. An apparent turbidity which isn't real. The way around it is not to measure the haze by scattering the light at 90 degrees, but to have what we call a forward scatter, and you measure haze scattered in a forward direction, in which case these small particles do not cause a problem. Now, we found that these particles can be from unconverted bits of barley that are not properly converted. And some people believe they're due to damage to the yeast, and the yeast can lose some of its outer layers if it's physically abused in the brewery.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking of an interesting thing that I experience. I'll have a beer that I've brewed. It'll be brilliantly clear, and then I'll bottle it, and I'll go back to it a couple of years later. It's been in storage, and decant the beer, and I can see in the bottom of the bottle just a very thin layer of very fine particles that is kind of sedimented there. It doesn't even really move from the bottom of this bottle. And I notice it more in beers that have highly kilned malts in them.
Right.
That I think when they go through the mill, they tend to powder. Right. And have a really fine particle size to them. And that dust kind of, that really fine particle size, it makes it through all the processes and stays in suspension long enough that it tends not to drop out until sometime later. And so I can have a beer that appears brilliantly clear, and then later on end up with years later, a very fine sediment on the bottom.
Well, of course, many beers I would go so far to say most beers will, given long enough, will throw
sediment.
Some sort of haze, turbidity, sediment, something like that. And of course the causes, there are many different materials that can cause cloudiness and turbidity and sediments in beer. And really I always preach the fact that you can't simply try to rectify it at the end, at the packaging stage. You've really got to address the whole gambit from raw material selection right the way through the process until the finished product to make sure that your beer is going to be sufficiently stable.
Well, let's do this. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll get into the process and things you can do to prevent beer haze. Back after this.
Brew right. Brew smart. Brew strong. This is Brew Strong.
In the past year, the Brewing Network has been able to add 2 new shows, expand our studio capabilities and quality, and bring more beer information home to you than ever before. In no small part, this is due to subscribers like you. Thank you from all of us at the Brewing Network. Without your monthly support of any denomination, we could not bring you the very best in live beer radio like Can You Brew It, Brew Strong, and the Sunday Session. Haven't signed up yet? Join your fellow brewers in the BN Army. Sign up today at thebrewingnetwork.com for a recurring donation as little as $2 a month. Besides all the great live radio you'll support, every subscriber is automatically entered in monthly raffles for amazing brew gear like a conical fermenter, a temperature control system, or your own draft setup. Become a part of the BN Army today.
This holiday season is one of gratitude, giving, and winning. More Beer says thank you to all their wonderful customers with deals from Thanksgiving through New Year's, in addition to low prices, free shipping, and the More Beer deal of the day every day. And one lucky customer is going to win Regan's Big Fat Package, the very first More Beer pressurizable conical fermenter. Rolling out just in time for the holidays, it's their brand new redesigned stainless conical line with a new threadless racking port, new stand options, and a new pressurizable lid. They're giving away one of these new pressurizable conicals on December 31st. For every order you place with More Beer between November 1st and December 31st, use the coupon code CONICAL up to once every day to enter yourself into the drawing. Go to morebeer.com for more details. The 2009 More Beer season of winning. Win yourself some great deals and maybe even a brand new conical fermenter. Enter today only at morebeer.com.
Downtown Joe's, located in the historic Oberon building in beautiful downtown Napa, California, offers an award-winning brew pub experience from 8:30 a.m. to 1 a.m. every day. For 15 years at the corner of 2nd and Main, Downtown Joe's has been voted Best Night Spot 7 times and Best Brew Pub for the last 4 years in a row. Brewmaster Colin Kaminsky's handcrafted ales, like his Tail Wagon Amber Ale and Double Secret Probation IPA, are the perfect accent to riverside dining, live music, and a relaxing outdoor patio. Don't miss the Beer of the Month, special rotating taps, and the BN Army Member Special. Wear your BN gear, get 10% off your beer. Visit downtownjoes.com to make reservations, peruse their extensive calendar of events, or just read more about their fantastic beers. Come enjoy the fine beer, food, and music. Downtown Joe's, the award-winning brew pub where you'll feel at home.
BN Army members, are you looking for a discount on hops? Keep listening. Nico's Homebrew Supply at nicobrew.com has hops by the ounce and by the pound. Choose from varieties like Amarillo, Centennial, East Kent Goldings, Hallertauer, Simcoe, Summit, Tomahawk, Warrior, Willamette, and more. And adding new varieties all the time, many for less than $20 a pound. Whether a couple ounces at a time or an 11-pound bag, all hops are shipped vacuum sealed and frozen straight to you. Nico's Homebrew Supply offers store-wide $5 flat rate shipping. shipping and won't waste your money on unnecessary overhead or advertising. They're going bare bones and passing the savings on to you. The staff at Nico's Homebrew Supply loves to brew and is committed to keeping homebrewing affordable and accessible to anyone who wants to join in this great hobby. And for a limited time, use coupon code BNARMY at checkout for a Brewing Network discount. Visit nicobrew.com. That's Niko brew.com for your hops and more. nicobrew.com, your bare bones buddy in the brewing business.
Hilo, what's it feel like?
Take awesome and multiply it by 2.
Yeah!
Spraying live beer radio all over your face.
Can't get any better than this, baby.
It's the Brewing Network.
Back to the two guys that know how to turn beer into beer. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. We're talking beer haze with Dr. Charles Bamforth. And before the break, we started to get over to the point where what can we do as brewers along our process? You were saying that trying to fix beer haze at the post-production point is meaningless. I mean, or at the very end of production is meaningless. Or it's not necessarily meaningless, but not really the best way to approach it. What you need to do is, start at the beginning and go from there. Where do we start? Do we start with our grain selection?
Yes, you do. And what you really need to consider first is what are the sorts of materials that actually give a turbidity, that can give a haze. Because by knowing what they are, then you have clues as to what you can do to make sure they don't come into the beer. Mm-hmm. And there are many of these. First of all, the materials from the cell walls of the barley. If you don't have good, properly modified malt, and you don't deal with the beta-glucans and the pentosands, people call them arabinoxylans, from the cell walls, then they, in the finished product, can throw hazes and give precipitates, particularly if you inadvertently cool the beer to an excessive degree, the ultimate being freezing it accidentally. Don't do that. And you'll get a precipitate. And often you find a lot of these beta-glucans in there.
And let me interrupt you for a moment. If you freeze the beer, my understanding was or people have told me over the years that if you freeze a beer, you can turn what's a temporary chill haze into a permanent haze. Is that true?
Well, what you actually get is you promote precipitation. Mm-hmm. And a classic example of it was published a number of years ago from Carlsberg, and they inadvertently froze quite an alcoholic product. Mm-hmm. So it's quite an alcoholic product, a lot of alcohol in there, but also, of course, it came from a fairly high malt grist, and a malt that had probably too much unconverted beta-glucan in there. Mm. So there's the beta-glucan in the beer, there was a precipitant, otherwise known as alcohol, and there was an excessively low temperature, and those things combined to bring the beta-glucan out of solution. Mm. The actual physical difference between a chill haze, which we can define in a minute, and a permanent haze is probably, there's a lot of theories about what it is, but I don't know anybody who's published a paper which said, this is the structure of a chill haze, this is the structure of a permanent haze, and these are the chemical differences. The big difference is size. Mm-hmm. The haze particles in a chill haze, and that's the haze that drops out of solution at 0 degrees Celsius, but when you take it back to 20 degrees Celsius, room temperature, then it goes back into solution. Mm-hmm. That's a chill haze. A permanent haze is, it's always there. Mm-hmm. A chill haze, the particles are between 0.1 and 1 millionths of a meter, micrometers. Permanent haze is between 1 and 10 micrometers. They're bigger. So the cell walls, as I was saying, that they can actually, if they're not properly dealt with, they will cause a haze. Within that, the starch, people still get starch hazes, and very cruelly I say, well, that's simply brewing incompetence, I mean, you should be able to
convert the starches
heck, that's what we're about, isn't it? Right, We're supposed to be doing that, But you can nonetheless still get, starchy hazes. You can have hazes that are due to oxalic acid and particles due to oxalic acid. And, of course, the big problem with oxalic acid, which comes from the raw materials, of course, is that it will cause beer stone and block up your pipes, your dispense pipes, if you're not careful. But that can cause haze as well. The one that nearly everybody focuses on is a haze that's due to proteins and polyphenols sticking together. Mm-hmm. And that's the one that we really, most people have done their work on and researched and studied. But there are some pretty wacky and bizarre ones as well. A number of years ago, I was at one of the Bass breweries, and they had a microscope on the table, and they said, "Charlie, take a look down the microscope." And I looked, and there were all these bacteria down there. They were dead. They weren't wiggling around, they were dead. And somebody said, "Well, what do you see?" I said, "Well, I think I see bacteria." And they said, "That's what we think." And that's the haze. That's the turbidity that we've got in our product. And the problem had arisen because they had changed the filter aid, the filter aid they were using downstream. They had been using diatomaceous earth, but they changed to perlite. And I hope there's nobody who makes perlite listening, but it doesn't do as good a job as diatomaceous earth. And so it wasn't so much a haze as a kind of a dullness in the product. And it was due to these dead bacteria. And people said, "Shh, don't tell anybody about this. We don't want people to know we got." And they come from the malt. And they come from it was a malt house that was less than perfectly clean. And these organisms are grown on the surface of the barley as it was germinating.
Lactobacillus type?
Yeah. And they'd been killed off in kilning, but they'd come into the brewery
and make it through the process.
And had not been filtered out. So it wasn't a developed haze, it was a turbidity in the product from the start, a very mild one. The best way to check for the clarity of a beer is on a light box, to have a shelf with the beer you can put on the shelf, and there's a light behind that shelf with a black line in front of it. And if you look at the beer through that, against that background of light, and you look at the black line, you clearly can't have a beer which you just given me in front of me, which is black in itself. But if you've got an amber beer or a yellow beer or a lemon colour beer or whatever, then you look at the black outline and see if you've got a really sharp black line. And then that is the ultimate test of just how bright it really is. So dead bacteria is another source. So, glucans, pentasans, oxalate, starch, proteins, polyphenols, dead bacteria. There are a whole bunch of different things you've got to worry about.
So and for the brewer, the practical takeaway is you want to buy yourself, necessarily highly modified malt or well modified malt, and of a quality from a quality maltster. Is that the takeaway?
That's sure, unless you're going to try to rectify the problem
modification yourself
in the brew house. Yeah, Let's just take the glucan then, in terms of the modification. Okay, so clearly, if you are going to use an adjunct which has got a lot of beta-glucan in it, say a torrefied barley or a flake barley or a raw barley even, roast barley, then you've got a lot of beta-glucan there. It's got to be dealt with then in the brew house. But if you've got a poorly modified malt or an inhomogeneously modified malt, in other words, most of it's germinated quite well, but there's bits in there that have not malted well because the barley was of poor viability or it was slightly dormant or something, then that's going to bring beta-glucan into the grist. The pentasan, which is the other component of the cell wall, that's never as well broken down as the beta-glucan for reasons that we're not entirely sure of. That will always be there. I remember there was an example of a haze that was reported by Foster's a number of years ago. And what they had observed was a beer that had been shipped from Australia and shipped all the way across to Europe. It bounces around on the back of a ship. It goes through who knows what temperature extremes. And by the time it got to the destination, it had thrown a haze. And the haze was primarily a pentasan from the cell walls. And so that's another thing that people don't necessarily take into consideration. It's the handling of the product. It's the extremes of temperature to which it's going to be exposed and how much agitation it's received. Because if you agitate, then you can actually whip things out of solution and cause a problem as well. So the raw materials are very important. So the beta-glucan, you want a good barley that has not got high levels of beta-glucan. You want homogeneously well-modified malt. You may have to deal with it in the brew house with a low-temperature stand, or, heaven forbid, some people would think putting an enzyme in there, which to me is perfectly okay.
Well, because you're putting enzymes in your mash anyways. They just happen to be within the the grain.
I just don't. There's this holier than thou attitude from some people. We couldn't possibly use a commercial enzyme. Well, actually, commercial enzymes often make a lot of sense. And so, I once had a student came to my lab from Germany. So when you've got a student coming from the land of the Reinheitsgebot, what's the thing to do? You make sure they work on adjuncts and enzymes.
Right, yeah.
Well, that's probably a good thing for them,
Yeah. Broaden their horizons a bit.
All right. Well, all right, so with the grains that we're talking about, now what about the mash itself and how you handle the mash, how you handle runoff, things like that, sparging?
Well, can we actually take one step back?
Sure.
And let's just talk about the proteins and polyphenols first, because I think if we can actually talk about those first, then we can actually go through the process.
Do those represent the largest proportion of haze causers in beer for most people?
Yeah, pretty much. But that brings me on to another point, if I can segue slightly, and that is that if you analyze a haze, the classic way of analyzing a haze is to spin it out, centrifuge it out, or filter it out in some way, and then stain it. And people stain with iodine, or as they say in England, iodine, to check whether there's any starch there. And they can stain with Congo red for beta-glucan and eosin for protein and so on. And what they're staining is what is on the surface. That's all. They're not staining what's on the inside, And these particles grow. So the really key thing, I always think, is what's on the inside. How did this thing nucleate? Where did it start? And what, And if you analyze a haze and you strip it down chemically and analyze it using chemical techniques, you usually find there's a whole bunch of different stuff in there, So it's very rarely just protein and polyphenol. You usually find some glucan and some pentosan and some metal ions and so on. But sure, quantitatively, I would say that the chances are you'll find it's mostly protein and polyphenol. Now, that protein comes from the grain, ultimately. Okay. And we now know that it's protein that's from the storage protein hordein, which is very rich in an amino acid called proline. And that is the main source, center in the protein that's important for haze, this proline-rich regions. The polyphenols, they come from both the malt, but also from hops.
Right.
So you've got to worry about both. Now, the very simple is a relative term in terms of polyphenols. They're horrendously complicated things that I wouldn't even pretend to think I could draw the structure for. But the simplest ones don't cause a haze. It's when they're oxidized and they stick together and polymerize. That is when they become haze promoting.
I kind of think of them as tumbleweeds.
Yeah. I like to think of them as dumbbells. And the classic model for this was developed by my friend Carl Siebert at Cornell, who used to for many years be research director at Stroh. And he has developed a model to show that you have these dumbbell two-ended polyphenols that actually link together the proline-rich sites in the protein, and you get this matrix.
Okay.
But if you've only got one end of the dumbbell, it can only hold on to one protein. It can't link two together. And if you don't have roughly equal quantities of the polyphenols and the proteins, you also don't get this haze formation. Mm-hmm. So you need oxidized polyphenols, and you need these proteins, and that's what is going to cause the problem. So when you want to worry about protein polyphenol hazes, the solutions are, well, get rid of the protein, get rid of the polyphenol, or get rid of both. And also, in terms of the polyphenol, prevent oxidation. So in just the same way as oxidation is important for flavor stability, it's important for haze stability as well.
I see. So that one doesn't cause the other, it's just you have a common cause for both.
Right. Absolutely right.
Okay.
Now, I've spoken to you before about oxidation in the brew house and the dreaded term hot side aeration, which one thing is for sure about hot side aeration and oxidation in the brew house, one thing is for sure, that will actually promote insolubilization of materials in the brew house. So that actually will cause things to come out of solution. And if you get rid of them in the brew house, they're not going to come out in the beer. So actually, I think the jury is out, as I've said before, about just how important oxidation in the brew house is for flavor stability. But if oxidation has an impact on haze stability in the brew house, oxidation is a good thing.
Yeah. So in other words, the more careful we are trying to prevent staling of the beer flavor, we tend to promote haze because we don't get it to drop out early.
That's a risk. That is a risk, you know. And I don't know. I have been quoted as saying, and I don't know whether I should say it again, that, you know, all this obsession with eliminating oxygen in the brew house, I just wonder to what extent it has been a bad thing for beer haze stability. And certainly, you know, that for a long time, people never really had much of an issue with turbidity. And then it all came back. Yeah. People started having these problems again. And it seemed to coincide with this shift towards minimizing oxygen uptake in the brew house. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not overtly advocating bubbling air into your mash. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that oxidation downstream for both haze and colloidal stability, haze stability, and flavor stability is a bad thing. But I wouldn't worry about oxidation in the brew house
upstream.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, and I think that goes to so many things in brewing. We see people taking them to the extreme. It's like, well, if this is good enough, especially in the U.S., I mean, this is the way we do things. Well, if a little bit is good, then a whole lot must be better. And, you know, if getting rid of oxygen or watching oxygen is good, you know, then totally eliminating oxygen must be the best thing in the world. So, I think it speaks towards, you know, especially if you're a home brewer, you know, don't worry so much. You know, the barley, you know, it wants to become beer. You know, that it's a very, very easy process, and you don't have to over-engineer it.
Yeah, I mean, it occurred to me as we were saying that has a direct impact on the whole batch sparging versus fly sparging, you know, oxidation of the mash controversy. I mean, really, if you expose the mash to oxygen, you know, during batch sparging, that's really not a bad thing, or it's a very low risk thing in your mind, Charlie.
I think so. The one issue, of course, is color. And I know you're going to be talking about color later on. But of course, when these polyphenols become oxidized, they do deepen in color. And, you know, it's exactly the same thing that happens when you slice an apple and leave it.
Sure. That
color development you see on the surface of the apple is due to oxidation of polyphenols. So that is why if you have a really, really pale beer, then sure, you know, I'd worry about oxidation in the brew house from the perspective of color. But if I was making, let's not name names, but if I was making Guinness, I wouldn't really worry about it too much.
Right. Okay.
But so in terms of the polyphenols, let's you know, take that as an example going through the program. What I like to teach my students is let's take the individual materials and start with the raw materials and then go through the brew house and let's see what the impacts are. So if you take polyphenols, okay, so there are polyphenols in the barley, but Carlsberg bred low proanthocyanidin barleys. In other words, barleys containing low levels of these haze
formers,
polyphenols. So that's one way. Remembering that there are polyphenols in the hops. But hop extracts, those that are made with extraction with carbon dioxide, liquid carbon dioxide, they don't have polyphenols. So you can, technically speaking, you could select one of these modified barleys and a hop extract, and you wouldn't bring any polyphenol into the brewery whatsoever.
Interesting.
And so that is one strategy. The polyphenols, of course, they will be extracted during mashing, but as people know, that as you prolong lautering and you extract more and more material, and the specific gravity goes down and the pH goes up, you tend to pull out some of the more astringent, higher molecular weight polyphenols.
Right.
So that's an important consideration. We've talked about oxygen and so on. And of course, right the way downstream, to remove the polyphenol, you could use PBPP. So, I like to take it one molecule at a time, one type of substance at a time, and that would be what I would do with polyphenols.
Interesting. Okay.
All right. Well, let's take a short break here, and when we come back, we'll get more into Beer Haze. Back after this.
Smart. Brew Strong. This is Brew Strong.
Hi, this is Push from the Brewing Network, and I want to tell you about the Brewmaster's Warehouse and how you can get 10% off your next order. I'm a pretty techie guy, but I've never seen an online store like this. It's awesome. Go to brewmasterswarehouse.com and click on Brew Builder. You can whip up a custom recipe so easily even Sven could do it. Seriously, it's slick. You can share your recipe with your own logo and notes to the Brewmaster's database if you want, and the best part, it keeps a running tally of the beer you're building while you're doing it. Then, bam, click Buy Recipe, and your cart is filled and ready to go with helpful suggestions in case you forgot something. This thing is amazing. Brewmaster's Warehouse is run the way a home brewer would do it, with great service, fast turnaround, and $6.99 flat rate shipping. Brewmaster's Warehouse and the Brew Builder blew me away. Check it out today at brewmasterswarehouse.com. I'm serious. And don't forget to put BNARMY in the discount code box for 10% off your order. Check out brewmasterswarehouse.com. Cheers.
Nico, listen, our lawyers said that we had to do this for 1 hour, and after this, we don't have to talk to each other for 3 more months to the next meeting.
Kids, come on, let's get out of here.
I'm supposed to have more lines. I'm the professional. Hey, it's Sully.
And I'm Nico.
And we opened the 21st Amendment 9 years ago at 563 2nd Street in San Francisco, just 2 blocks from Giants Park, to make great beer and have a great time doing it.
That's right, because to us, the 21st Amendment is more than just the right to make beer. It's the right to experiment, to be innovative, and just do things differently. And so now, we're putting our craft beer in cans.
That's right, cans. You can find our world-famous Hell or High Watermelon Wheat Beer and Brew Free or Die IPA throughout California and Alaska.
And now it's also available on draft at select accounts in the Bay Area.
So next time you're at your local neighborhood pub or good beer store, be sure to ask for 21st Amendment in cans.
Because everyone likes it in a can.
Tasty crack cans.
Tasty crack can.
Organic ingredients. Fresh, clean, good for you, good for the planet. And Seven Bridges has the best selection in the world. Everything is a click away at breworganic.com. Join the mailing list for special deals and regular updates about new products and specials. They have been brewing organic and serving organic brewers for almost 12 years. They can help you brew great organic beer. Take the National Organic Brewing Challenge, the only BJCP-sanctioned nationwide brewing competition just for organic beers. Enter the competition by October 10th for your chance to win great prizes, including a hands-on brewing experience at an organic brewery, brewing equipment, or organic brewing ingredients. Complete details about the competition are online at breworganic.com/competition. Seven Bridges is cooperatively owned in awesome Santa Cruz, California. Everyone there is dedicated to worker and people-friendly business practices and environmentally friendly, worker-friendly brewing products whenever possible. Visit today, breworganic.com.
like the Lance Armstrong of the beer world. Except for that nut thing.
This is Brew Strong.
We're back. We're talking Beer Haze with Dr. Charles Bamforth. And during the last segment, you actually mentioned speaking with John and doing an interview with him about hot site aeration. We did a full show on that as well. So if you get a chance, go back through the archives and look for that show. And Dr. Bamforth provided a great deal of excellent information on that as well. And that was another great show that we owe you for.
Well, you're giving me a beer right now. So
right, so we're even. Okay, yeah, done.
I'm cheap.
Well, and very knowledgeable. So, Charlie, what about where were we on Beer Haze?
Well, when I was walking through the individual molecules, and I was talking about the sort of things that influence polyphenols. And we've talked about beta-glucans and the cell walls and making sure you have good malt, homogeneous malt. And then, of course, if you need to do with these cell wall materials in the brew house, we get into the whole low-temperature mashing in, or the use of commercial beta-glucanases and pentasinases. And my recommendation, if you're prepared to do those things, is to use a mixture of those two enzymes. They're much more effective than either on their own. Oxalic acid, the way to deal with oxalate is to make sure you've got enough calcium in the brew house. The rule of thumb is 4.5 times more calcium than oxalate. The reality is I don't know any brewer that measures oxalic acid, so quite how they hit at 4.5 I don't know, but just make sure there's plenty of calcium around, and that will precipitate it out in the brew house and it won't get through into the finished product.
How much is plenty of calcium? Are we talking 50 ppm?
Yeah, that should be plenty with most oxalic acid.
Okay.
And then the protein, and that really is the interesting one. There's lots of protein in beer. And I've said that it's the proteins that have these high levels of proline that are the particular problem. How to deal with that? And there are various ways, but there are two key stages in the brewing process to deal with proteins and polyphenols and haze. And the first of these is boiling. The more vigorous the boil, the better. The vigor of the boil is absolutely critical for many things, not only for haze and stability, but also for flavor as well. I remember a number of years ago going down to a small brewery, which I certainly will not name, and they asked me what I thought of the beer. And I said, well, do you want the truth? And they said, sure. I said, it tastes of halitosis. And they weren't desperately pleased with that answer. And they asked why. I said, because the boil is not a boil, it's a simmer. You're not getting turbulence. And therefore you're not driving off unwanted volatiles, and therefore they're staying behind, and the beer taste is bad. And to their credit, they actually rectified it and now win prizes. It's the same for haze. If you don't have turbidity, you don't get the precipitation and producing the particles that then will be removed in the clarification stage. If you don't get the turbulence, they will not grow to a sufficient size, and you'll tend to have material surviving into the beer, which is a big risk for haze.
So essentially, during the boil, the number of times you turn over the liquid as you boil, columns of liquid rise and others fall back down,
Correct.
And it's essentially stirring it up.
Yeah.
And the number of times you get that done during the length of the boil, the more of these precipitates that are formed based on, and the clearer your beer will be. You get flavor development. Now, one thing that as homebrewers were told is, you can't boil too vigorously, and you never say too much. You can't do too much to some homebrewer because that they will.
Yeah.
And I see people boiling 50% of their volume in an hour, and and I think there's a point where there's too much, where the wort's leaping up and hitting you in the face. It's probably too much.
Well, you got to remember, I'm coming at this from a big brewer perspective primarily. So I've got in my mind's eye now a nice big kettle with a lid on it, and safety devices and also it's the key thing for boiling is the surface area to volume ratio for a tank. Now, we've got a small brewery, the old brewery at Davis, where we get 15, 20, 25% evaporation in an hour, for the simple reason that the surface area in proportion to the size of the tank is very big, and therefore you've got a big area of evaporation. On a commercial scale, it's a different thing altogether. You've got a much bigger volume with a relatively smaller surface area, and therefore you may only be getting a 5% evaporation, 6% evaporation, something like that, in an hour. So we need to be cognizant of that. But the only point I'm making is that if you just have a simmer and you're not getting turbulence, visual turbulence, you are not going to drive those particles together to make bigger ones that are going to drop out of solution.
So by turbulence, you're kind of alluding to what we, Jamil, call a shape to the top of the boil, where you see
little round,
curves, in motion on the surface.
And you can see the particulate matter in there, the hot break, which is pretty visible, traveling through and see that making loops around in there, and then you're getting some good exchange of wort throughout the column of the kettle.
Correct. Now, a guy who worked in my lab in the UK many years ago, Rob Reed, he actually showed that you could replace the thermal energy with agitation. So he actually had much lower evaporation rates, a lot of heat, but he had a big rouser in there, and he was whipping it all up that way. So
it's a collision of these particles
it's exactly,
and they end up sticking together, and then that makes them bigger, and they're able to participate.
Yeah, good word in the context of brewing, collision. Yeah. So that's the first main stage. The second key thing is post-fermentation and what I call cold conditioning. And and again, let's talk on a commercial scale now. But the lower the temperature you can take the beer, short of freezing it, not freezing it, but taking the temperature as low as possible, the better it is. And we did a piece of work some years ago to show that it's the temperature much more than the time that matters, such that by taking the beer to -1 or -2 Celsius, so that would be 29 Fahrenheit or down, you won't freeze the beer because it's got alcohol in there, which lowers the freezing point, but you will chill out material, chill haze basically, and it will come out in a relatively short space of time. So -1 for a couple of days is better than +1 for 2 months.
Okay.
It's the temperature that matters, and then to keep it cold right the way through the filtration, because otherwise, if you warm it up again, that chill haze will start to go back into solution. So it's a really key stage.
A couple of things that you've got me thinking of. One, going back to the boil, is I know some brewers, they'll toss in a little bit of hops at the very beginning of the boil. The reason being to add some polyphenols to get better later clarity in the beer, because those polyphenols will be there to combine with the proteins, and especially if you're doing something like a lot of amateur brewers do, they'll do a 90-minute boil. The first 30 minutes they don't add any hops. Anything to that about throwing in a couple of hop pellets and getting more precipitate that way because of the first 30 minutes?
It will depend. I mean, it will only work if those polyphenols coming from the hops are polymerized. If they're simple, basic polyphenols, it's not going to have an impact. But experience is a good thing. If people do it and find it works, then so be it. And it's up to people like me to try and explain why. But it's not something that I've certainly not come across it as a commercial practice for that reason. So the boiling and the cold conditioning. But in terms of protein, then of course if you do need to use a downstream stabilizer, then the most frequently used commercially is silica gel. Silica hydrogels and silica zero gels, which are drier. And they're very effective, and the people who market them claim, probably with justification, that they will remove haze proteins, but not the foam proteins as well. Some people use tannic acid, so they actually add more polyphenol. It's a very complex polyphenol from gall nuts, and actually gives very, very substantial precipitate. But then again, what it means is down at the bottom of your tank, you've got this great big precipitate, and there's lots of beer associated with it, so the losses tend to be increased, and it also tends to jeopardize filtration. And of course, the original haze stabilizer was the enzyme papain from papaya, pawpaw, meat tenderizer. But that certainly does screw up the foam if you're not careful, because it will go for the foaming proteins. Just recently, there's a new enzyme that has come into the marketplace, and this is called prolyl endopeptidase, which is a fairly fancy name. But the name indicates that what the enzyme does is attack the parts of the protein where the proline is, which, of course, I said already is the part that's particularly important for haze. And it certainly is very good evidence that it will just get rid of these haze proteins. Now, this enzyme was first developed to go for people with celiac disease, because the proteins that cause haze are very similar to the ones that are responsible for celiac disease in wheat and probably in barley as well. And therefore, this enzyme is being touted for consumption by people with celiac disease. So, but it certainly is a good haze preventative as well.
So you might find that in your celiac products at the local drugstore. Huh?
Oh, may well done.
There you go. Throw some in for your beer.
Yeah.
Well, and one thing that I always see, I think, is common homebrewer internet lore is that it's important to chill your beer rapidly, because that's really where you get the cold break and all that. And I've always I think I first read it in George Fix's book about it's really a temperature-dependent thing, and if you get down to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, you haven't even gotten half of the break material to form at that point.
Right.
It really it's down at zero, and even then, you would have to filter it out. I know a lot of people, they say, well, no, leaving the break material in the fermenter is a good thing because it's, nutrients for the yeast and all that. I think there's still plenty in there, even if you get rid of all that break material.
What I'm talking about with the chilling is the beer, post-fermentation. In terms of the break, the cold break, again, there are so many schools of thought. When I was director of research at Brewing Research International, and I had to have a research program that satisfied all of our members all over the world. And of course, brewers, they all have different opinions. So what Miller thought was a good thing, Kirin didn't necessarily agree, and Heineken took a different stance. So I had to come up with some sort of program that satisfied everybody. And I said, what are your views on wort clarity before fermentation? And there was everything from the Germanic, it's got to be really bright, to the people who said, no, we want it as full of filth as possible. Not filth, but we need it to be really cloudy. And, there have been a lot of studies on it, and what really the particles do is they form sites for carbon dioxide to be released in the fermenter. And, the yeast sort of is rotated through the fermenter on those bubbles. And therefore, by having turbidity there, you're actually boosting fermentation. And so it's encouraging the fermentation. It's not a nutrient thing. There were experiments where they actually replaced the cold break, or the trube, with, I think they used something like carborundum powder or something, and it was just as effective. And what it is this release of carbon dioxide. It's on the particles. That's the important thing.
Because the carbon dioxide has an effect also on the yeast as far as yeast activity and health.
Well, that's right. And you're also, that's another thing. You're actually releasing these localized high concentrations of carbon dioxide around the yeast. You're actually releasing it. So, the yeast is not getting suffocated.
And also stirring the yeast up, just like on a stir plate. They're much more effective in consuming the
precisely.
sugars.
So, and I don't know anybody that's shown that material going into the fermenter is necessarily a bad thing for haze stability downstream, as long as you've removed the particles and you've done the things that I've talked about, and you've got the thing chilled down or something. But the other point, of course, is it depends on what you want to do with the beer. If the beer's not going to travel to the other end of the earth through inclement weather, and is going to be inspected by highly critical customers and so on, it's not, in which case you need to do a belt and braces and give it all it's got. If it's travelling upstairs, from the cellar, brewed locally, let's not go overboard about this. Let's be sensible.
Definitely. Interesting. Well,
okay. And all right, so we're what part are we in the process? We've gone through the mash and the boil, and and what about different finings? That the average amateur brewer, or craft brewer might have access to.
Well, there are still many commercial brewers that would use carrageen and Irish moss to promote the particle formation and settling in the brew house, and of course, isinglass and auxiliary finings downstream, alginates and silicates, judiciously used, can aid in the downstream processing and clarification stages. As regards stabilizers downstream, most brewers fall into one or other camp, either the PVPP school or the silica school. And facetiously I say, well, from my time in Bass, it was who gave us the best lunch, we would buy their material. Actually, we were PVPP people, and many of the claims that are made, you've got to remember that. And I've got some very good friends who supply these materials, so I don't want to upset anybody. But many of the claims that are made, of course, are made by the suppliers. So the people who sell silica gels will tell you you should use silica gels because they remove specifically the haze protein, they don't remove the foam protein, and they do not remove the polyphenols. So you've got all these wonderful antioxidants there, and all these wonderful materials that are going to contribute to the body and the mouthfeel of the beer and so on. The people who sell PVPP say, we're leaving all that wonderful foaming protein behind, and all we're doing is removing polyphenol, and of course the polyphenols are at such low levels anyway, they don't make any impact on mouthfeel or antioxidants or anything like that, And, so who do you believe? I don't believe that the levels of polyphenols in beer make any contribution to mouthfeel whatsoever. Yeah, they are antioxidants, and whether they're antioxidants in the beer or antioxidants in the body, and sure, it's always a good thing to claim that beer's got antioxidants and just stick it in the face of those red wine people. But, but it's not a big thing. It's not a big issue. I really don't think so. And so it's whatever works for you. Belt and braces, I do know some people for beers for export would use both. Would use both.
Reduce both by some amount.
Yeah.
All right, and one question I have that I'm sure people are interested in, and you've got a number of books out, and can you go over what those books are and what people might expect from them? And
sure.
I'm sure our listeners might want to pick them up. Maybe we can even, Justin, get a case of books in. I can run them out to Davis and talk you into signing them. We could have signed copies in the store. Maybe.
In fact, they're talking about your books in the chat room right now. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, I had an old boss once, and he said he'd had 2 copies of my book. One he would, I should sign it, and he would give it away. And the other one, don't sign it, because knowing my ego, it'd be more unusual to have one that's not signed than one that's signed. There are quite a few, including the one on goalkeepers from a famous soccer team in England, but that's a sellout now, so you can't get hold of that one.
Oh, see.
Well, you can at a very high price on some of these antique bookstores. But anyway, Where do we start? There's a book called Beer, Tap into the Art and Science of Brewing, which has just gone into its 3rd edition. And that's with Oxford University Press. And that's really targeted at somebody who go into Borders or Barnes & Noble and would want to pick up a book that does not trivialize beer, but doesn't go ridiculously into the science. That's achieved quite a following, so I'm quite pleased with that.
I have that. I think it's a good book for most home brewers.
Okay, thank you. And then at the more molecular level, there's a book that the American Society of Brewing Chemists published, and it shows how much I remember. I can't remember what it's called now. Principles of Malting and Brewing Science, I think it's called. And that's where I go into the chemistry in a much more detailed way, and that is the book I use for my class on campus, my lecture class. And another book which is all about quality of beer, and that was published by Brewers Publications, Charlie Papazian's organisation, called Standards of Brewing. And we talk a lot about there's a lot of issues of quality in there, and some exercises as well, some questions and so on, see people's interpretation of analytical specifications and brew house, how to calculate a grist and so on. And then there is an outrageously expensive book called Beer, Health and Nutrition, which shows why beer is actually good for you. And another book which is much cheaper called Grape versus Grain, which is a completely unbiased comparison of beer and wine. And most of the wine guys get it. They realize they're taking themselves far too seriously. And a book... God, I've done too many, haven't I?
I have several of these. I realize as you.
There's a book in a series on alcoholic beverages that we devoted to beer and quality. I edited it and wrote several of the chapters, including a chapter on Haze. Somebody else wrote that actually, but foam, haze, gushing, colour, and so on. Again, it's not a particularly cheap book, but it's good. And now, wait for this, in December, Recorded Books are bringing out a 7-CD collection. I think it's called Brewmaster's Art, and I went down to Marin County for 2 days and sat behind a microphone just like this one and recorded this book. So that'll be out in December.
Wow, that'll compete with our show for listening on the commute. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, 7 hours. Good work.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Great. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll get questions from the chat room. We'll get those answered right after this.
Keep your carboy cap on. This is Brew Strong. We'll be right back.
Williams Brewing is your online resource for prompt delivery of quality home brewing supplies. Since 1979, Williams Brewing has offered the finest equipment and freshest ingredients and the best customer service in the business. Cut hours off your brewing sessions by using one of their 11 varieties of famous Williams malt extract. Their Williams German Pils is mashed with pure German Moravian 2-row barley malt for a light blonde color and malty crispness you just can't get from other extracts. Or check out their unique fermenters, draft beer equipment, bottling aids, and more. They even have their own line of precision hydrometers. Go to williamsbrewing.com to browse their vast selection and enter promo code BREW at the order checkout for $5 off your next order over $50. Orders placed by 3 p.m. ship the same day. Again, go to williamsbrewing.com and enter promo code BREW at checkout for $5 off your next order. Brewing is easy, the Williams way.
Hey, what are you doing, man?
Writing a review of WLP 400.
What? You're reviewing yeast?
Yeah. White Labs has home brewer reviews of all their strains. Are you new to these interwebs? Check it out.
That's awesome. White Labs, your source for great yeast, invites all brewers to visit whitelabs.com to read and write your own reviews of all their yeast strains. Get real-world tips and tricks from other brewers who have made the most of their vials and post your own experiences. It's another way White Labs brings you closer to the best yeast on the planet.
And send. There you go.
You misspelled flocculate, dude.
What?
White Labs. It's all in the vial.
Hi. My roommate's gone for the weekend, and I'm wearing something flimsy.
Listen, baby. I told her not to call me after 8. I gotta go.
Who is that? Your girlfriend?
Shut up, Doug. Did you guys get the cauldron set up on the altar of my art?
If you weren't so busy getting booty calls, you'd know that.
All right, I'm using the scroll of Mosher to boil the first decoction.
You took too long. The color is now darkened past the point where you can still call it a Pilsner.
Yes, sucks.
I hate it when Greg's the brewmaster.
What's this? Poindexter Urkel?
Dude, can't you see we're in the middle of a brew session?
Is that an actual beer?
Yeah, I crafted it. I don't really use the dice anymore. I'm a 10th level beer nerd.
Are you a 10th level beer nerd? Do you belch White Labs 833 and crap Simcoe? Then you're in good company at Northern Brewer. Check out Northern Brewer's huge selection of dorky beer kits, including the Cylon Detecting 3-Hearted Ale and the collector's item Super Alt.
Mine's in mint condition because it's still in the box.
Make 10th level at northernbrewer.com.
You're listening to the Brewing Network.
Learning to brew has never been so disgusting. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. I still never understand that one about being so disgusting. I'm sure that wasn't for
because you don't listen to yourself sometimes, Jamil. You say some really creepy things. That's where that came from.
All right. Well, hey, I'm glad to know that. I have to maybe go back and listen to some shows.
Yeah, you're going to need to do that. Everyone else knows. They understand.
They all understand. Okay. Well, all right. Maybe I shouldn't have asked. I thought maybe it was a mix-up with
no
Sunday session or something.
It was very strategically placed.
Okay. Well, speaking of strategically placed, we have Dr. Charles Bamforth here in the studio with us live, and we also have a bunch of listeners live, and you can chat with us during the show, or actually chat with Justin. You get yourself over to thebrewingnetwork.com, and there's a listen live button, and there's also the ability to chat now with the studio and ask your questions. So what kind of questions do we have today about beer haze?
A couple of good questions come through from the chat. One person wrote in earlier. He says, when I keg my beer, it seems really hard for me to get a clear beer. And he said, I'm pretty sure that it's not just sediment from the bottom. However, when I bottle, I never have haze problems. Is there a difference? What am I doing wrong?
Wow. I would think if the haze is increasing over time, it's probably a bacterial thing.
Yeah, that's true.
But perhaps I missed something there. So there's a problem in the kegs, but not in the
bottles.
In the bottles. Yeah.
It says bottles are always clear.
Yeah.
And usually you have more of a bacterial problem when you're bottling than you do when you're kegging.
Yeah.
What if you cut off the bottom of his dip tube?
I don't do that. Somebody was asking me about that. Oh, do you cut off the bottom of your dip tube? I'm like, no, because then I can't get all the liquid out of the keg. I wait for everything to settle, and then I don't shake the keg around. So your first pint may have a bit of something in it. You toss that, and then after that it's clear until the very end.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Well, nothing springs to mind on the top of my head on that one. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'll have to come and try it. Where is it?
Send it over, right?
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times it's very difficult to analyze a problem without actually tasting the beer, seeing the beer, smelling the beer, or being able to run some tests on it. So, but I would wonder if it wasn't some sort of. Does he say it's getting? Is he still in the chat? Does the haze get worse over time? Then I'd say maybe bacterial or even a wild yeast or something like that.
Yeah, this one was actually emailed in, so
okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure we'll get the answers we need.
All right.
Without knowing the precise procedures that he was following, it would be very difficult.
Which, by the way, is a good example, guys. Just make sure you're pretty specific when you email in your questions.
Also a lot of times, people will serve the keg beer and the bottle beer, from two different locations, and maybe the keg beer is much colder and it's getting a bit of a chill haze. And if that haze goes away when the beer warms up, then he knows it's just a temporary chill haze. And maybe if he puts the bottles in the same, he should do the same batch, bottles and kegs, split it, put them both in the same fridge, condition them both at the same temperature, serve them both at the same temperature, side by side, and see if there's any difference at that point, and see if the haze goes away when it warms up.
A controlled experiment. That's very good. Very good.
All right, Steve Q writes in.
And let me throw this in. He should have somebody serve him the beers, and maybe in a triangle, so that he doesn't know which one's which, because your perceptions get all messed up when you think
Drink.
you know what's going on.
Oh.
Right. When you drink to excess. Yeah.
Right. Okay,
All right.
Steve Q writes in, can underpitching lead to a yeast haze? He says, it seems when my ferments are very sluggish and take forever, it seems to take forever for the yeast to clear. Is this due to underpitching? He says he ferments at 67 using 001, White Labs 001.
I can't see why, but why is he underpitching?
Good question.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a couple of things that'll happen with underpitching. All right, so one is if you pitch inappropriate, the more yeast you pitch, there are certain things that will be taken out of solution by the yeast, the things that will attach to the cell walls. Right, that will, and that could affect it in some way. If you're underpitching because of a yeast health problem or something like that, or an old pitch of yeast, or low viability, or and maybe you've got some petite mutants and you've got a respiratory deficient yeast, they tend not to flocculate as well. So that might be it. If you're doing there's a number of things along those lines I think may have to do.
Not only that, if the yeast is not healthy, then there's an increased risk of autolysis. There's an increased risk of damage from that source as well. And so, good fermentation practice in terms of correct pitching and correct nutrition and so on is critical for all aspects of product quality.
All right, and one more question from the chat is about Wurflock and Irish moss. And this question comes up a lot, actually. When is the best time to add these things to the boil? Is it 10 minutes? Is it flame out? Is it at the beginning? Everyone seems to have a different answer for when to put in the Irish moss and Wurflock.
My recommendation is experience. Try it. Do some experiments. What works best for your set of circumstances, that is the best approach.
And so do you find that it is different brewery to brewery?
It's not something I've made a detailed study of, quite honestly. The first thing I would do is take the advice of a professional brewer for what they would do it. Mm-hmm. But it may depend on the circumstances. It may depend on the grist. It may depend on certain other conditions as well. So really, it's a case of trial and error.
Okay, good answer.
Well, and I also I think homebrewers were told, well, at 15 minutes out, you add your Irish moss or whatever, and we're all taught to add it at that time. And I think that's an excellent point. It may vary depending on other parts of your process. It may vary. The Whirlflock folks, I think they recommend, in the whirlpool, and so
it really does come back to where does all this dogma come from, and why do people are so passionate about their views in certain areas? And it's because
somebody typed it on the internet. That's why.
Yeah, maybe, but also what worked for them. And it really does depend on precisely what you're doing, what you're using, where you're doing it, and so on. That can have a major impact, and the conditions will be very different in different places.
All right, that's it from the chat room today, guys.
Okay. One thing I don't think we talked about much was the effect of water on haze.
Okay. Well, the water is there are two potential impacts. One is going to be things like the level of calcium that's in the water, and that's going to influence things like the oxalate precipitation. It's going to influence the activity of the starch-degrading enzyme alpha amylase. If you don't get enough calcium, it's not going to stabilize and activate the alpha amylase, so you're not going to get good starch breakdown and so on. So the calcium ion is going to, but also anything else that's in there that is likely to influence. There's going to be anything else in the water which potentially could jeopardize stability,
like nitrates or nitrites.
Yeah, I was thinking more of silicates and so on. And of course, there will also be silicates coming from the grist as well. That's a two-edged sword as well. We've just done a study, and it's the paper awaiting publication at the moment. And we found more silica in beer than anything else. Anything else in your diet, it's huge levels. So on the one hand, that's great if you want to make a health claim, but possibly not quite so good for stability. And what we found was the more vigorously you extract, in the brew house, the more silicate you get. So again, it's the whole prolonged lautering thing. It's not only about polyphenols; it's about silica as well, and of course, the silica in the water supply as well.
Would you say that in general you want to minimize the amount of lautering you do of the grain?
I think you can go to extremes. There's a beer that I won't name that to me has a very grainy character, and I know for a fact they really do drag out every last drop of extract. If you analyze the wort successively through lautering, clearly the specific gravity is the highest as you start to lauter. But even the last running, sure, they've got extract in them. They've got fermentable carbohydrate. Yes, they do. But they pro rata proportionately have more astringent material, potentially haze forming material as well. And I really do think graininess, harsh graininess, is one of the risks of over extraction that I think is to me is not a good thing.
Right. All right. I think that's an excellent mini education in beer haze. I know you could wax eloquent for probably days on this subject.
Well, wax, but I'm not sure it would be eloquent. I'm trying to wane now, huh?
Well, thank you very much for joining us. And if you're listening live, we got about another hour of Dr. Bamforth's time, and we want to do a Q&A session with him. So get yourself in that chat room, and you can ask some questions, and we can do that till we run out of his time at about 3:30. And if you're not listening live, make sure you catch that in the upcoming archives. And also go by our sponsor, morebeer.com, and check out their products and what they've got. Stop by the Brewing Network store. You can pick up some shirts, some glasses. Hopefully we're going to have some of Dr. Bamforth's books in there, signed, and you can pick up some of those. And until then, brew a beer for yourself, brew a bunch of beers for others, and brew strong.
Brew strong, everybody.